I'm Owen Bigland. This is the Inside Edge video blog. Okay, happy Saturday. As a lot of my Saturday blogs, I don't know where this one will go. I'm just going to ramble on a little bit here, meander around on a bunch of different topics, real estate, investing for retirement, that kind of thing. So I just got back from a couple days ago, a nice little week in Cabo San Lucas. That's my second trip down there in the last 5 months. I've discovered a really nice resort down there that my wife and I have kind of fallen in love with there. So as you guys know, I'm a big believer in taking regular breaks. I probably, now at my age now, probably take pretty close to 3 months, 2.5 months off a year, spread over sometimes as short as a 3 or 4 quick day break. I'll fly down to Los Angeles or Phoenix or Palm Springs, or sometimes I'll fly to Hawaii for a week. This 1 week trip to Cabo. In the summertime, I take a longer break, so I'll take off for at least a couple of weeks at a shot. And then at Christmas time, I usually take a good 2 to 3 weeks off around Christmas time and go someplace warm. I'm a big believer in it. Just taking regular systematic breaks. It's going to tie into a couple of guys that have asked me about retirement and when do you say when? When do you know when to retire? People, wait too long to retire into their late 50s or 60s. They work like a dog, retire, and then die 2 years later. And yeah, that happens a lot. I'm going to talk about a book that I was recently gifted here that's a fairly popular book called Die with Zero that I'll just quickly talk about. But, that's why I've always taken breaks. I'm a big believer in enjoying my life in my 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. Rather than waiting till I'm in my 60s or even my mid 50s to retire early. You're getting pretty old already then. So I've been kind of, doing these systematic trips for the last 30 years and enjoying my 20s, 30s, 40s on vacations. And because you get a lot different experience out of my travel when I was in my 20s and 30s than I do now. I still enjoy it now, but it's much different than when I was going to Ibiza for 3 weeks at a time back in my 20s and 30s. I stay in nicer places now, but you can never get back your youth. And I've talked about a lot of that in my book about enjoying your life, rewarding yourself systematically every year instead of just living like a miser, and why I'm not big on that FIRE movement at all. Those guys live like complete misers, eating, hot dogs and rice, in order to retire at some weird low age, like in their late 30s or 40s, so they can live on some very low amount of retirement money and live like a miser during those years too. When you've lost all your good years, that you could have been enjoying some time off, for what? They shrink everything instead of grow. I've done lots of blogs on that FIRE movement, but let's talk about a few things here. So when I was in Cabo, I had an invitation, this came in a couple of months ago, for a online real estate investing and retirement seminar. It was done in Toronto. It was I got a free password for it. I think it was about $100. It was a 4-hour online Zoom seminar. It was interactive. They brought on a bunch of guests from real estate, from financial planners, stockbrokers, that kind of thing. And I'll give you a couple of takeaways from it. It was an interesting seminar. Overall, it was pretty good. But this isn't the first time I've been to these type of seminars on real estate, investing in real estate. As far as the real estate portion goes, I always find that the guests they have are overly optimistic on the returns you're going to make from real estate. Now, as you guys know, I'm a pretty positive guy. I'm extremely bullish long-term on real estate. The reason is that I've been in the business for 35 years. I walk the walk, talk the talk. I bought my first property when I was, before I turned 19, still own it today. So I know what the returns long-term over 20 and 30 and 35 years on real estate are going to be and what to expect, because I'm in the business. But I always find that these seminar guys pretty much, shoot for the moon on a lot of this stuff. They talked about buying condos in downtown Vancouver. You buy these, they don't go anywhere but up, of course. Never talk about any of the downside with it. But they're basically throwing out, you pay $600 for the condo today, it's going to be worth $1.2 million in 10 or 11 years. So it'll double every 10 years. it could happen. And yes, it has happened in the past. I've had condos and homes that I've had that have more than doubled in 10 years. But that is not normal. And to expect that moving forward is, I think, overly optimistic. As you guys know, I'm pretty bullish on real estate, but I also think I'm a realist, and I give you guys the real numbers with this stuff. I'm not a pie-in-the-sky type guy at all. For the last 12 years on my blog here, and if you've read my book, I use much more conservative numbers on the return on real estate. I say that if you buy a condo today, that condo, let's say you pay $600 for it today, $600K, in 18 to 20 years, there's a good chance it'll double about every 20 years or so. And that is using a pretty conservative annualized rate of return or growth rate. Probably somebody can do the math for me. Maybe that's what? 2.75, 3% annualized rate of return, and that's about what real estate would do. Real estate tends to keep pace with inflation, not in lockstep. There's always delays and lags there. But over long periods of time, if the inflation rate runs at about 3% over 20 or 30 years, that's about the return, maybe a little bit better, you're going to get on real estate. So keep that in mind. I've been to so many of these, and I find that they're always way over optimistic on it. And then, they went into some reasons, and they had a viewer where people watching could put in their comments, and they could talk a bit about what's keeping you out of real estate. That's also over embellished too. Why you don't want to get into real estate. Oh, bad tenants, too much work, getting tenants, placing tenants, they'll wreck your home. For sure, there are those stories out there, but for the most part, those type of horror stories you hear with bad tenants, getting stiffed on the rent, wrecking the home, those are pretty much all on the landlord, and they can pretty much be mitigated 100%. Pretty close, not entirely, but by simply doing the proper procedures to screen your tenants. Touch wood, I've been a landlord for 35 years. I've never had any major issues with any of the tenants I've had, and I've had probably well over 100 tenants in all my properties over the years. The reason is that I do my due diligence. I get a tenancy application. I get a beacon score done. I check their referrals and references. I call their past landlord. I call their employer. By doing those things, and then the final thing, I just get a good bead on them and read from talking to them, showing them the home, asking them some questions. You can develop those skills, but that goes a long way to mitigating a lot of your risk there. The other thing, of course, they talked about, equity investing, pros and cons of that. Same type of thing, though. They over-embellish some investments, under-embellish kind of the buy and hold strategy. I think they underestimate what good, high-quality index investing could do. This particular guy they had, of course, he wants to get you into some individual stocks because, hey, you need me. We're in tumultuous times here in the stock market, and you need an expert to navigate you through these choppy waters. And pay me that 1% under management and all the other fees I'm going to charge you and commissions, and I'll get your money working for you in the stock market, buying this and selling that. Total bullshit. What these guys don't tell you, and I've told you on my blog here for years and years now, this guy that they had a couple of these guys, they represented brokerage companies. Give me your 1, 5, 10, and 20-year returns. Show me some model portfolios you're running. Let me see what your returns are. Just should be simple enough to give me. They won't. They never will. The reason they won't is because they cannot beat the indexes. They can't beat the S&P 500. They can't beat the Dow. They can't beat the Triple Q. They're falling woefully behind over long periods of time. And then the kick to the head is they're charging you 1% or 1.5% to underperform the market. So those I always get a bit of a chuckle at as well. But anyways, it wasn't a bad seminar. They talked a little bit about REITs as well. I don't own any REITs, at least not now. 10 or 15 years ago, I dabbled in a few. H&R REIT, I think I had Dream, I had a few. Never did much for me at all, these REITs. They're very opaque. I'm not so sure about the accounting. Lots of fees and commissions that are skimmed off the top with these REITs, and then they distribute the rest. I follow a couple here that I don't own, and thankfully I don't because they don't do anything. I would rather own the real deal. Buy and hold tangible real estate because you're getting the leverage there. And that was the other thing, of course, with real estate versus equities. Equities are great. I own both, as you guys know. There's advantages and disadvantages to owning both. And I think the nice thing about equities is it's pretty much 100% passive. You can index invest, buy some individual stock, maybe monitor it, but you're not having to manage your properties, fix toilets, and all that other stuff. The downside to equities, though, and the big advantage to real estate is using the is using the leverage. And that's the magic with real estate. You put 20% down, borrow the other 80%, the interest is deductible. Now, of course, leverage is a dirty word for a lot of people. I've done so many blogs over the years on this. You have to understand how leverage works, where your risk tolerance is, and everything else, and don't over leverage. Although in Canada, you can't over leverage in Canada. Anybody that tells you can never bought a house. The banks will not let you borrow anywhere near what would be considered over leveraging here. So remember that. But that's the magic with real estate, is the leveraging. So a couple of last things here. Back to this guy that had asked me about, Owen, well, when do you retire? How much is enough? I think a lot of people work too late and work too long, and then end up dying and work like a dog for 40 years to retire and die 2 years later. Yeah, that happens a lot. How much is enough? Well, in the Wall Street Journal just 2 days ago, on the weekend edition, they came up with their new magic number for retirement in the US, and it is $1.5 million. $1.5 million, it's up 30% in the last 2 years. So it was something like 1.1 3 years ago. Now it's 1.5 million US. So that would be what? About $2.1 million Canadian is kind of that magic number. Now that isn't going to buy you a dream retirement. That number, they're saying, would provide at least a somewhat comfortable retirement. 1.5 US, or we'll call it 2.1 Canadian. It could, for the right people, what everybody needs for retirement and when is enough and when to retire and live off your investments is all over the road. A $2 million retirement fund for me wouldn't do it. I could retire on that, but for me and my lifestyle and what I want to do in retirement, no chance. Not living in Vancouver. You could get by, but that would be about it. 2.1 million or 2.5 million in Brandon, Manitoba, or Saskatoon would go a lot further. It could be done if you want to live in Brandon, Manitoba. So it's all over the road. I agree with what this guy is saying, he had a surgeon friend that dropped dead in his 50s. They were tall, they were fit individuals, no health warnings. Yep, that can happen. He's interested in my thoughts on retirement. He thinks the 4% rule is overrated. Too many people need to think they have to save millions before they can retire. He's right. Again, this magic number here is about 2.1 or 1.5 million US in the States. But yeah, you can definitely retire on much less. It's a personal decision. So, brings me to this book that I just started reading. This is I think it's a #1 seller, New York Times bestseller, Die with Zero. And it's a book written by Bill Perkins, Peter Attia, a longevity coach that I follow. This is one of his recommendations too. But it talks exactly about that. Most people, not everyone, but a lot of people don't know when to say when, and could probably retire a lot earlier than they think. And the goal with this book is what good is it to retire with $20 million in your 60s? At that time, you're probably not going to spend anywhere near what you do in your 30s and 40s. And you're right, you're older, you're less mobile, all that other stuff. You live 10 years and then you end up dying with a $10 million estate that the government's going to take. And he's right. The goal should be to basically die with zero money in your checking account. And that would be nice, pretty tough to do, but that's what this book is advocating. But the counterpoint to that is, of course, is in the Wall Street Journal, that $1.5 million is kind of the golden number. There's only one problem, though. The average American currently has $88,000 saved. And in Canada, that number is even worse. So I think in Canada, The typical 55-year-old only has something like about $60,000 or $70,000. 55-year-old has $60,000 to $70,000 saved. So most people, they're not going to have a problem dying with zero. They basically got zero now, unfortunately. But for some people, absolutely, this is something to think about. It's something that I've been thinking about. That's why I'm reading this book on, you know, when do you know that time to pack it in, live off your investments, and retire. What I've done, and it's not telling you guys everyone to do this, but I've kind of done it where, again, I take regular systematic breaks throughout the year. You could almost call it little mini vacations or mini retirements throughout the year, and that's kept me going. I think the other thing is it depends on what you're doing for work. If you're working a 9 to 5 or working in a job you don't like, then that's got to be pretty tough. If you're in a career or your own business like I have, and you enjoy the work, then it's a much different story. I could probably see myself in another 3 or 4 more years semi-retiring. I've already got a pretty big team now that I refer a lot of work to, but I still enjoy the work. I still enjoy overseeing the listings and the negotiating and working with clients. But in another 2 or 3 more years, I'll probably start to slide a lot more of that off to my team. We'll see where it goes. But, you know, I'll give you guys maybe a book report on this die with zero, but again, I think, yeah, the guy has a point there. You know, eventually you want to, hopefully, if you do everything right in your 20s, 30s, and 40s, I've talked about this in my book, it sure makes your life pretty golden when you're in your 50s and 60s, because now you don't need to get up and work if you don't want to, and there's something about that. But at the same time, how much is enough? It's totally a personal thing. For some people, that might be 800,000. For other people, that might be 8 to 10 million. It all depends on your lifestyle and where you're comfortable at. I'm Owen Bigland. As always, thanks for watching. Have a good weekend. I'll see you guys next week.